Welcome to Purple Elephant Radio, where we discuss the mindsets, philosophies, and strategies needed to make art and tell stories that make a dent in this era of abundance. This is a show for the unbound creative, the undefinable artists, and the unidentified philosophers. I'm your host, Sean Green. Welcome back to Purple Elephant Radio. This episode, if I'm sure you saw it in the title, is going to be all about Chat-GPT. But not just Chat-GPT, really any of the new generative AI models out now. I think really when I use Chat-GPT, it's more of a stand-in because I think it's the one most people will recognize. But this can also include, Google Bard and also the generative image AIs. So Midjourney and Tolle 2. And I know there are probably countless others that I can't even think of and probably have not come across yet. But those four are kind of the dominant ones that at least I know of. And I personally use ChatGPT and Tolle 2. But this conversation is not really focused, again, as I said, on one specific brand, but AI as a reality now. And I wanted to take it from more of a philosophical view rather than a what's new with this stuff. Because I think that's what the news is really good at, but they're not necessarily good at looking at AI from a long-term perspective, or at least looking at it with a reasonable long-term perspective, I should say. And I'll get to what I mean about that in just a minute. But before we jump into this, I do want to mention I had made a 2-part AI episode way back when. I'm not sure which episode on the podcast this was, but if you're watching on YouTube, it would only be on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It was a 2-part episode. I believe it's called either The Creativity Code or AI and the Artist. And in that 2-part episode, I really dove into the specifics. If you're a little bit curious on what it actually means for, an AI model to train on data, and you want to understand a little bit more about the concepts of AI, that's a good episode for it. This is not going to be one where I get into, what's under the hood of Chat-GPT, because I'll be honest, I really know not that much about it. But I just want to mention that so you can look at it if you're curious or if you were expecting something a little bit more technical. And talking about the present day reality of AI, it's here. And it's only going to get better, a lot better than what it is right now. At the time of recording this, Chat-GPT 4 is out, available to the public. And it's something that I've been playing a lot with. Most recently, the last episode of this video, or of this podcast, was titled with getting brainstorm ideas from ChatGPT. It wasn't a exact pick. I'm sure creators who've used ChatGPT can relate to this. I sort of took a hodgepodge of the best little bits and pieces of the brainstormed ideas that it gave me. But the way this episode's going to break down, I essentially wanted to start with the existential fear, the worst case scenarios of AI, then offer more of the intuitive, obvious possibilities for it, and end with something that I don't think I've seen anywhere else. Kind of a new way to relate to AI and honestly the fear that can bud from seeing its possibilities. So that final part, I'm probably gonna, if I'm breaking this episode down, call it the revelation of AI. And I'll leave it at that when I get to that. But starting with the existential fears of AI, I'm not gonna say stuff that you don't already intuitively know. Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of job displacement soon, if it isn't already happening now. And I'm not saying that as some expert on, the economy, what it will do to the economy, but this is stuff that as you use ChatGPT, it just becomes obvious what it can do way better than some junior level employee at, say, a marketing firm or, even a law firm. When it comes to that stuff, I just want to offer this sort of message of historical hope, which some people may already know, but a lot of people may not realize. If you look back in history, not even that long ago, maybe the past 50 years, every technological improvement that has sort of been a paradigm shift in technology has displaced jobs and brought more jobs from it. I think, the obvious one is Social media sites did not exist that long ago. Google did not exist that long ago. And now when you look at the S&P 500, it's really those technology companies that are dominating the market. And with that, providing countless jobs. I will say I'm sort of saying this from the sidelines. Right now I have a blue-collar job as a server at a restaurant. And ironically, I'm safer than the white-collar creative worker. I think if you would have asked someone in the 1970s, they would have thought the robots were coming for the jobs like mechanics and stuff like that. And the last thing to go would be the creative work. Clearly, we're seeing that's not the case. And honestly, if you really thought about it and look at the innovations of, say, the past 20 years, we as a country, but really as a globe, have not really invested too much in hardware, and we've focused a lot more in software development. And so when looking at it from that lens, it only makes sense that this generative AI, the stuff that exists on the same iPhone that I've had forever, even if it's been upgraded, or the same laptop I've had forever, it's the stuff that is on the screen that's changing quite a bit. But that's just a little anecdote to think about, that software has been much more invested in than increases in hardware. But the existential fears go a lot deeper than just job security. When kind of looking at it and thinking about what these existential fears might look like, just from my own use cases with it, I've sort of boiled it down to 3 points. One thing that and again, I should say these are, I guess you could call them predictions, not that they're inevitable, but just stuff that I think are pretty likely, and especially likely if someone is not aware of them as they're using the AI platforms. The first thing is that AI, at least Chat-GPT, has a very vanilla way of responding to prompts. You know, this is assuming you're not adding in a modifier that says, okay, give me this response, but write it like Stephen King or Ernest Hemingway. If you're not adding in those modifiers, its basic style of writing is very basic. Just playing around a few times with more self-help based questions, stuff like, you know, I'm feeling stressed, what are 5 things I can do to calm myself down? The results it gives are very generic. I don't think it's necessarily a surprise, because I think looking at what it's based on, again, that episode I talked about, when you consider its data set, which I'm sure is massive, the odds are that it doesn't have ideas that we haven't come across on the internet before. So it's very good at bringing these ideas into one coherent paragraph or listicle, but it's not like this stuff is going to blow our mind. But it's not necessarily the tone of how it is giving us responses. I think I think that it influences our thinking. And what I mean by that is when we become familiar with one set of vocabulary, one set of always explaining things, that's the way we start to think. I mean, it doesn't take too much rationale to understand this. The bigger your vocabulary, the more nuance you can give to a topic. You know, I think of stuff like classical music, which I know very little about, and I enjoy it when I listen to it, but then there's someone who is studying music or studying to be a composer, and they have, 100 words to describe the nuances of the sound. By having all those 100 words, they can really go in depth on it, and they can probably hear things or discern things I wouldn't be able to hear myself, or at least wouldn't be paying attention to. And of course, really, I guess what I'm talking about is jargon, as it relates to industries and different topics of study. And like what I'm saying with Chat-GPT, it is sort of this, combines everything, and although it doesn't sound like a robot, it sounds like almost it sounds like the most average Joe type of speaker you could possibly imagine. And when we lose that nuance, when we lose those little quirks that give writing a certain flavor to it, I do think that we lose a little bit of our ability to think about stuff. And so I guess what I'm saying with this vanilla vocabulary is there's a chance it's going to make us dumber. We are outsourcing our intelligence similar to the way we've outsourced it with Google search. Many people would say that's not a bad thing. It's not like we can hold, all this information in our head. I'm sure the people of my generation and younger would suck at Trivial Pursuit. I know I do. And I know someone like my dad is really good at knowing sports trivia, that I think people aren't trying to learn these things anymore because they know they can just look it up. And I think AI is going to take that to another extreme, where on one level we have outsourced, the information that we're getting. It's very rare nowadays for someone to take the time to have a question in their head and introspectively find the answer. And I'm not talking about factual stuff. I'm talking about, the example I gave earlier. I'm feeling stressed. What are some things I can do to feel less stressed? I mean, it is going to vary from person to person, but just because of the way us digital natives have been trained, it seems much easier to just ask the question on Google. And nowadays, ask the question to Chat-GPT. But even with Google search, we had an element of choosing. We could see, scroll down as you will, but let's just say the top 3 results. We could pick from them. And we could kind of get a basic search. We could see the headline and a little bit of the subject for each website link. And that was nice because the first result is not always the one we want. I think with AI, with ChatGPT, it's a great thing that it can distill basically the whole of the internet, or at least before the September 2021 cutoff. It can distill all that into a simple paragraph or a listicle, but we've lost the element of choice. We are truly putting our hands, or at least our thinking mind, in the hands of AI. And I think it's fine to use as a supplemental source. But if we become so reliant on it as a personal assistant that we no longer fact check the AI, then that problem becomes much more intensified. And I think that transitions to the next point, the next existential fear. And that is this idea of AI being used for propaganda and misinformation or disinformation. It's not that AI is going to be the one giving us the propaganda unless someone is asking for it for whatever reason. It's much more likely that someone with malicious intent, or if not malicious intent, greedy intent, just trying to get attention, ad revenue, is going to use AI to write the most sensational articles and stories and scripts it possibly can. And of course, it's hard to tell the difference between a true article and a completely fabricated one, especially when you have such an incredible technology doing it for you. And I'll kind of skip to one of the possibilities with AI, and that is copying in articles to ask for bias. So there is sort of a workaround where we can use AI to see what is written by AI, but I'll come back to that in a second. So the propaganda stuff is obviously already really dangerous. And it's not like AI is the tool where people are going to first come up with propaganda. It's been around for a long time, and obviously social media has intensified it. But within the platform of ChatGPT, there's also this problem of, I guess you could call it unintentional propaganda. And really it's called the hallucination problem, which is where you get a response, a very seemingly factual response with made-up sources or made-up names or made-up book titles. And this is really difficult because I think although the people at OpenAI and all these AI places are going to do their best to get rid of that hallucination problem, I think it's always going to exist. I guess what I'm saying is we can't claim that ChatGPT is going to be the centralized source of information when it is coming from the whole of the internet, or when it's pulling from the whole of the internet. As long as we're aware of that as a potential, that propaganda is going to be more likely because we have AI now to draft up these articles in split seconds. And as well as the fact that within the platform of asking prompts, getting text-based results, there's chance of a hallucination, of getting something that seems completely real that is completely fabricated. Yes, we can get a quick answer, sort of like Wikipedia. We can get a quick overview of a topic, but there's no guarantee that that is 100% true. I think as long as we have that, we can safely use AI as a research tool, or at least a research jumping off point. Because I think that's what I found is a really good tool. In working on what I mentioned in the last episode, working on the book, I was able to get a lot of stuff very quickly on certain philosophers and psychologists' point of view. What's their body of work? I could get it summarized really quickly, but that was not going to be the thing that I thought was the end-all of who they are. I didn't assume that Chat-GPT had the whole answer, but it gave me a lot of questions to go to Google or to go to the internet and find sources that I could at least reliably trust, or at least more reliably trust, I should say. But then the third existential fear as it relates to AI, and there are, I will say, countless others I'm sure I'm not thinking of. I'm not trying to bring this episode down and actually make you fearful. I mean, I'm sure my kind of bubbly attitude shows that although I'm laying these out, I'm not that concerned about it. I think the fact that I'm aware of them and hopefully making you aware of them, it greatly reduces the chance of them being sort of this unconscious cultural problem. But the third fear is AI talking to AI. And what I mean by that is not that, AI is going to collude together and eventually take over humanity. I mean more so emails being written by AI, sent to people, and getting responses written by AI, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so really, eventually, coming to a point where all our communication online is written by AI and given to us by AI. So we sort of become in this communication bubble, which I'm sure some people wouldn't mind it. I mean, if someone has a personal assistant, a real human personal assistant, that's probably what they're already experiencing now. But I think we really need to ask ourselves, on a fundamental level, what does that do to humanity? I mean, already we know that just because you call something like having friends on a social media platform, that doesn't actually mean you have a lot of friends, or at least friends in the way that we think of them in person. By that same analogy, when it comes to digital communication, yes, I mean, texting someone is not necessarily going to be as sincere as talking to them face to face, or even calling them on the phone. But at least you typed the message. Now, I understand if you're not a great writer, or you feel like there's a delicate topic and you're kind of afraid to broach it correctly. I understand all that. But I think if there is a sort of complete, okay, I can just sort of outsource my communication from now on, we lose a really deep part of being human, which is communicating with other human beings. And I mean, again, we could say, okay, I'll just use AI for digital communication. And then when it comes to in-person, of course, I'll do it myself. But the line can become blurred. I mean, that's sort of a scary thought, but, as I have AirPods where Siri, if the second it comes with a very intelligent generative AI, which Apple hasn't said anything about it, but it's inevitable that stuff like Alexa and the Siri, which I have a thing in this room here, so I'm not going to say it too loud. But as those get infused with stuff like Chat-GPT, who's to say we won't keep one in our ear and have it feeding us a script because we don't want to think about actually talking to this person anymore? So it is sort of a hazy line where using it for all our digital communication could slowly seep into in-person communication. And it seems very easy right now to say that will never happen, but we just got to be aware of it, because it really, really could. Now, in finishing with the existential stuff, I get to talk more about the optimistic side of AI and using Chat-GPT as a tool in your life. For one, I think it is really, really good at being used as a bias detector. And I honestly imagine someday soon there will probably be a specific AI platform or app that is revolving exclusively around bias detection. But what I mean by that is sort of two ideas within that. So one, detecting AI being used in content, whether it's written, video, audio, whatever, because that's pretty good to know, especially as we talked about propaganda. It's good to know that this thing that looks like Joe Biden giving a speech was actually completely generated by AI. That's going to be very, very important. But there's also just, I'm talking about political bias. And any other biases you can think of, confirmation bias, sunk cost bias, the very mental biases that most people are semi-familiar with, but don't often think about that much. I think, because of the nature of social media, and specifically making money from social media, what's monetized is what gets attention. And what gets attention is usually the sensational stuff, the extreme points of view. And it has become harder and harder to basically take information from the extreme left and take information from the extreme right and bring it together and say, what are they actually talking about? Unopinionated. It can be really hard to do that the further these political news sources, the further they get from each other. But I think Chat-GPT and generative AI is really good at finding that middle ground and giving the objective facts. And that's where I mentioned it as a flaw, the vanilla vocabulary. That's where it's actually really, really nice to have. To see that, okay, I pasted in an article and it had a lot of biased points of view in it, but Chat-GPT can explain the bias as well as what is sort of the pure facts in it. The next possibility, which, it's going to vary on a commercial business side as well as a personal side, but it's using generative AI for data analysis. And I think, again, another little tangent, I imagine that like the Microsoft Office suite is probably going to, and I've already seen it a little bit, AI being kind of worked into the basic platforms, Excel, and I'm sure it will be coming soon, being used in Microsoft Word as like a writing tool. But when it comes to data analysis, suddenly this thing that you see on my wrist, which is sort of like a Fitbit, like a fitness sleep tracker, suddenly this becomes a whole lot more useful. The tracking of personal health data becomes way more practical when we have a generative AI able to not just look at the data, but give us advice in very practical terms. Now, there is the big issue of privacy. And especially as it comes to health data, I know there are a lot of regulations, but when it comes to these AI platforms, I'm not saying to give your health data to Chat-GPT, especially in its experimental phase. But I do think the possibility is there. I can imagine a world in the near future where it can tell my heart rate's going up and at the same time tell that I'm not doing some physical activity. And I can just get a little prompt on my phone, hey, your heart rate's up. Is everything okay? It seems like a futuristic world, but it's very, very real with the technologies that exist right now. But then there's also the case where, me as someone who, I don't like to be on my phone that much, what if I don't want all those notifications? So there is going to have to be some artfulness to this integration of interpreting the data in real time and giving us real-time advice without being so disruptive. So I don't know exactly what that will look like. That's one more where, at least on the personal data side, it's a little bit of a longer term thing. And in regards to the business side of analyzing data, I don't want to get into that too much because I don't really know too much about it. Way back when I was working at a paid-per-click Google Ads marketing agency, I could see how useful that would be to have that now, and especially using it for data reports, which are such a big part of marketing firms these days. But again, more the business side is stuff that you're probably going to see countless videos on as it stands today. So I don't want to talk about that too deeply. And the final thing, The final possibility, again, there are countless other possibilities that I haven't mentioned, but just for the sake of simplicity, the final possibility of using ChatGPT, and really this ties in as well the image generating AIs, is to look at it as a renaissance for creativity and curiosity. Now I'll take those one by one. When it comes to creativity, whether you are a content creator or an audience member, I would say you need to start kind of giving up your human bias and really start seeing AI as a supplemental tool if you are a producer of content and creative work. And as an audience member, I think there is always a case to be made that, human-made work, especially time-consuming work, should have a level of added respect and admiration. But that should not stop you from enjoying the fruits of AI's creativity. Especially, and I'm sure this is already on the horizon if it's not already publicly available, video-based AI, basically writing a prompt and getting a short video. It does get a little bit complicated when we talk about how our creators who have their work in the training data of Chat-GPT or one of these image generating sites, how they actually get reimbursed and how they enforce their copywritten work. That is definitely a sticky situation that I don't understand enough to actually contribute something of value. But I do hope that that doesn't get overlooked. And I honestly, just thinking out loud, I imagine that micropayments will become more of a reality than what they have been. Instead of the ad-based model of basically you get money for however many people look at your work, most likely these AI companies should give micropayments as work from creators is being drawn into their data set. And most importantly, they should have knowledge that their data or their content is in the data set itself. Again, that's the political regulation stuff that I don't fully understand. But the curiosity part is actually what I'm more fascinated by. Because I think when I say being in a curiosity renaissance, that also means being in a education renaissance, where we are at a unique time where suddenly we can learn anything and have the information presented to us in a way that makes sense uniquely to us. Just for example, for whatever reason, the question of, how can a photon be both a wave and a particle, it was on my mind. And just being a little bit nerdy, I asked the question to ChatGPT, along with a pretty dense scientific article. I pasted that in as well. And with that, it was able to read the article, give me a little bit of a summary, and when I didn't understand what it was saying, I was able to ask follow-up questions, ask for analogies, and kept going and digging, asking more questions, and even asking within my prompt, okay, is it like blank, blank, blank? Is this correct to say it's like this? Basically confirming my own understanding through ChatGPT, I was able to get it. And I don't think that if I was in, say, a junior in high school, I don't know if a teacher would have had the patience for that. Especially, a teacher would not have had the patience if 20 people, all with different questions, wanted that in-depth level of understanding. Again, this is another complicated, nuanced topic where we're suddenly getting into how is public education going to change. I remember when ChatGPT initially came out, I guess it was a couple months ago, maybe 6 or 7 months ago, but the first thing people thought of is, I can suddenly have ChatGPT write my 5-paragraph essays. And of course, the vanilla vocabulary, which I keep referring to, I'm sure it's not going to take too much for some software to detect AI written articles by students. But that's not really the question at hand. The question is, how can we change from a rote memorization model of learning, and not even just memorization, but supporting a claim, some topic that we don't really care about? How can we move away from that to having students discover their innate curiosity? There are countless examples, and honestly, I'll probably end up making a video about the changing nature of education and how curiosity can become sort of this new leisurely pursuit, something besides video games and consuming Netflix. I think that's something that is something I want to give more thought to before I really talk about it more. But those are kind of the three possibilities. Using it as a bias detector, having it be a data analytics tool, especially a personal data analytics tool, and then using it to spark this curiosity and creativity renaissance. Now, what about the final part of this video? The revelation. This is where I get a little bit philosophical, maybe a little bit esoteric. For some of the listeners, it may feel like that. But I think what Chat-GPT and all its iterations as it evolves, what it offers us is a really unique chance to change our identity. And what this will essentially boil down to is, I think AI will cause a shift in consciousness. And I know it's already going to sound a little bit esoteric to most listeners or viewers. But just listen with an open mind for a second. Let's imagine a world, which will probably be a reality in a year or two, where AI, something like Chat-GPT, truly knows everything humanity knows. I mean, more so than just what it knows on the internet. I mean, every single possible source of information. Hypothetically, let's say that's possible. It will become a master of conceptual knowledge. It will be better than any human, better than the smartest human that could ever think of anything. It will be able to debate anyone better than the best debater, and it will be essentially the smartest, most creative, mentally capable being compared to any human. And I say being, but of course it's a machine. I'm not implying that AI will magically develop consciousness. If that were to happen, where would you derive your sense of self? I mean, everything that we think of as being who I am. And again, for a second, we'll have to pause the physical attributes. But everything conceptual that you think of as, I'm a funny person, I'm a comedian, or I'm a creative person, I can write very deeply, or any of these things that can be done conceptually. AI will eventually, not too long from now, be better than you. And not only better than you in the abstract sense of, we know there's always going to be someone a little bit better than us. But I mean better than you at being you. Like saying something in your voice. That may be a little bit of a scary proposition. I don't think my body of work is so big, but I do know that I probably have enough to, if I were to post in everything I had ever written, Chat-GPT could write in my style. At one point, that may have scared me. It really does not anymore. Because I realize, although I do have my quirks that cause me to speak in a certain way or write in a certain tone, or even think and talk about topics in a certain way, although a lot of that stuff is unique to me, I understand that there will come a day when AI can do it better and do it more precisely in greater quantities. And who's to say there's not a world where I'm so fascinated with AI that rather than creating the work myself, I just ask ChatGPT to write a new thing in my style, write a new thing about this topic, about this topic, about that topic. It's a little bit arrogant to think, but if anyone's seen one of the new Black Mirror episodes, Joan is Awful, it sort of hints at what that is. In that episode, people get sucked into their own reality, their own idiosyncrasy that AI is generating for them. But what am I getting at here? I'm saying that in realizing your, greatest attributes, the thing that make you unique, could be done by an AI and better and at a quicker pace by an AI. There has to be this coming to terms with that. This acceptance that an exhale. That yang quality as opposed to the yin quality So the yang meaning taking action, doing, and the yin being more of the resting, relaxation. That yang quality that usually we associate with ourselves, with our unique personality, we have to realize that there's something beyond that. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it being conscious, being in the moment, or, being awareness itself. Whatever term you want to use, don't get caught up on the actual concepts of it. And honestly, if you want to get a little bit more in depth on what I'm actually talking about here, I'll link a podcast below by Eckart Tolle, who you may be familiar with, may not be, but definitely worth looking at to kind of see what I'm talking about in a little bit more depth. But what I'm saying is you have to know yourself and realize that you are not just the product of the work you produce. You are not just your total conceptual sets of knowledge. You're not just your personality even. And of course, the conversation of identity always gets a little bit murky and politicized when we bring in race and gender. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about what makes you unique. What we will ultimately realize, what you, I hope, will ultimately realize as you go deeper in this exploration of self-knowledge, is that you can be unique, completely unique, and at the same time not be afraid of being a conformist or being really anything at all. You're open to all possibilities. Again, I will preface this as many times as I need to. It's a little bit esoteric. It's not the stuff I normally talk about on this channel or on the podcast. But we have to start looking beyond the surface level personality traits and get to a deeper place that can't be shaken just because a machine is better than us at something or at everything that we once thought we were the best at. There was a time when I thought, being creative was my unique factor. Even if I'm not the most athletic or the smartest person in the room, I can always be one of the most creative. That's not going to be true anymore with AI. And that really did cause some deep self-reflection in me. And I no longer fear it. And now I see it as completely a tool. So even if, all jobs that I once could have been qualified for will get replaced by AI, I'm not worried about it. And because I'm not fearful of it, because I've sort of gotten to the root of the fear, I get to kick my feet back and enjoy the ride. Enjoy what I called before the curiosity and creativity renaissance as it unfolds before me. And I would hope that the same sort of peace of mind can be realized by you. So that you're not biting your nails thinking, when is AI going to replace my job? But instead you can see it as, wow, maybe AI replaced my job. But I live in this time where there are so many possibilities. I broke it down into 3 fears and 3 possibilities. That is an infinitesimal amount of the possibilities that AI is capable of providing to humanity. And so even if the worst fears are realized, even if we become like zombies, like some of the more dystopian movies have shown us with technology, I know I won't fall into that. I'm not worried about getting sucked into political propaganda written by AI, because I will always maintain a level of skepticism, but also a level of fascination. I can play the game of using AI while at the same time realizing that although it will change the world, it is not the entirety of the world. We become, obviously you're watching this on a screen right now, or listening to it in your headphones. Although we've become a very digitally native world, the reality is a hell of a lot bigger, a hell of a lot more expansive than what can be seen or observed on a screen. So there's a place for all this technology stuff, And of course it's fascinating. And of course it's important to use it and to not be sort of a Luddite and completely ignore it and think that it will go away. Of course it's important to have your foot in the door of AI technology. But go into a park, go into nature every once in a while. Realize that no matter how depressing or, manically optimistic the news is about AI, there's so much more. So much more. So I hope if there's any message I can give to you, it's turn off however you're listening or watching this and get outside. Even if it's hot as hell out, because I know it's like 100 degrees here in Missouri right now. But I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to this video. I hope it provided a little bit of a perspective that can be reassuring, or at least spark some self-reflection, so that maybe one day you will get to that point where the peace of mind is a reality and all the existential fears about AI do not shake you anymore. I know it's possible because I am living in that place right now. Thank you.
If you like this episode, it would mean a hell of a lot if you rated it on Spotify, on iTunes, left a nice review. Thank you.